We've got to move this industry forward. We have to break down the silos between developers and designers and contractors. Like, we're literally designing and building and shaping communities and the planet.
Glad to see I can really clear out a room. It's awesome. So at Schneider Electric, we've been working with Shadow and KP for the last several years. And you know, we obviously are involved in sponsoring and getting involved. But why are we here? Obviously, to meet more of you, and I hope to get a chance to meet all of you later today. But I'm also, and let me just make sure I get this correct. I'm also here to help bring up the issue and raise the awareness of the impact of climate change. But also, we have spent a lot of time at Schneider Electric in figuring out ways to help solve it, and what's the fastest way as all of us can potentially work together to help protect our planet for our generations and our future generations to come. So a lot of this is going to be around how we think about it, but also potentially how you and your organizations can also help solve this challenge. And you know, it's not too difficult to see that, it's loading up here, it's not too difficult to see that when you just Google the news, climate change and the effects of climate change and the catastrophes that it's been causing has been ramping up to a massive extent. There are more fires, there are more floods, there are more hurricanes, there are more viruses, there are more droughts that we can ever imagine that are happening today. And it doesn't take a scientist to tell you that it's rapidly increasing and that it's highly driven by the effects of climate change. And just some of the news that is happening just this year, the Yangtze River, the drought, we're losing species. There's no more Yangtze dolphin anymore. So what do we do here? And surely, surely we can solve things. And just to make it even more relevant, this was last week. And normally, we're always like 2 degrees. Oh, I know somebody who knew somebody. But maybe a quick show of hands. How many of you know somebody who was affected by Hurricane Ian? Yeah, I mean, it's no longer just 2 degrees of knowing somebody. Oh, I knew somebody that had this. And just me personally, best friend, neighbor to KP and I in Atlanta, his parents were affected. They live in Fort Myers. This is pictures that he sent me over text over the weekend when he went down to go look at their home. Thankfully, they were in New York and not Florida. But you can see this is a grocery store where the shelves are barren. It's hard to see on that screen, but maybe on there you can see that you can see the water line on the sofa, and you can just see some of the books and the sogginess of the books and family pictures are all destroyed. Not only was it inside the home that the water line was up to about here, but also you can see it destroyed their home, but it also destroyed their cars. You can see this is water in the cup holder, as how much, and that car was closed, was sealed off. So you can imagine, and this wasn't even near the epicenter, that we've seen in the news. So, I have to believe that we all feel that this should not be the new normal. That we should be able for us and our future generations to keep living and thriving, not have to make these same worries that it's going to get worse. And we're at this critical juncture. I think many of you have seen this chart showing the CO2 increase that's been happening over the last couple of 100 years and how it's dramatically risen. And the challenge right now is that, are we on the path to go from 4 to 6 degrees rise in temperature, or can we do things to get us down to 1.5 degrees that will help curtail this problem? And the fact of the matter is that right now we're achieving about 4 gigatons a year. We've got to rapidly go faster. We've got to hit 50% reduction by 2030 if we're ever going to stop this trend from occurring. And when you go deeper, people talk about this rapid rise and everything, but let's actually now kind of zoom in to understand exactly where the problem is happening. So this is the amount of GHGs that are in CO2 equivalents that are given off every single year, that are generated every single year, most of it through human actions, 60 gigatons a year. But when you break it down, 76% or nearly 80% of that is CO2. Of course, there's methane and other causes of global greenhouse gas emissions. 80% of that is coming from energy that is coming from the burning of fossil fuels, mainly coal, oil, and gas. So still a heavy, heavy amount of CO2 coming from energy. So that's energy source, but let's try to figure out how do we solve for it by the industry. And I'm going to show this, and then I'm going to come back to it later on in the presentation. And you can see that 80%, of course, the same number, but where that's coming from is mainly buildings, transport, and then industry. So that's how we kind of look at where it's coming from the industry source and where it's coming from on the energy source side, on the production of fossil fuels and power generation. So let's go deeper, because we're Schneider Electric, so we think about the energy piece, and we see that's one of the biggest pathways for us to solve for. So when you think about the energy side, we spent a lot of time researching this, and you'll see there's a few studies. We have the Schneider Electric Research Institute, and we go in deep and look at all of the different scenarios across the world, modeling different outcomes. And we spent a lot of time looking at how do we actually solve the energy problem? What are the best vectors? So when we look at it in terms of impact and solving that bar, that 80% bar, 45% of it can be solved for energy supply decarbonization. What does that mean? That means powering things with renewable energy, hydroelectric, et cetera. So decarbonizing our energy supply chain. The next thing comes from electrifying processes. I think many of you have been or worked in industries where there's a high amount of fuels being used, for example, making glass, making steel, making oil, pulling oil out of the ground. For floating offshore platform, we'll take huge amounts of gas or oil and use that in turbines to burn, to pull and produce it. So that could be all electrified. And the last thing that often gets overlooked is energy demand optimization. So what does that mean? That means reducing the demand. In this building right here, taking however many kilowatts of energy and reducing it by optimizing it, by making it smarter, and also making it more circular. So these are, we believe, are the three biggest areas, and we go into great detail explaining the differences and how those are achieved in this study that I invite you guys to look through. The good news is that this is all not new. Everything I'm showing is not new. Governments are realizing this. They're making commitments. COP26, now we're about to hit COP27. 74 countries have made net zero pledges, accounting for nearly 90% of the greenhouse gas emissions. That's great. They made their targets, their pledges. The US has pledged with the new Inflation Reduction Act to put nearly $400 billion of money into green stimulus to help reduce carbon by nearly 50% by 2030. So countries are helping. Companies are also making commitments. 4x ramp up since 2018, since 4 years ago. We're now at 3,600 companies that are using science-based targets with commitments on renewable and on decarbonization. And the great thing is, it's not just big companies like ourselves, it's also small and medium-sized companies as well. And not only is it a kind of a good mix of companies, we hope to see a lot of more smaller and medium-sized companies also really push, and that's why a lot of you are here, you can influence this. But also around the mix of countries too. It's US, but it's also heavily Europe, but it's also Asia. A lot of emerging markets there too. So it's good to see this change happen. It wasn't like that 4 years ago. So I'm going to go back to technology, because not only is it good news from companies and countries, but it's also good news because we actually have the technology to solve these three ways of decarbonizing energy. But to look at those technologies, you have to go back in the past to understand it better, because it was actually the cause of why we're in this situation before, which is the Industrial Revolution that happened back in the 1800s with the mechanization of machines and steam power, et cetera, burning coal. But we often don't look at, we call that Industry 1.0 or Industrial Revolution. We often don't think about electricity, and there was also an electricity revolution that happened too, the pioneering and practical use of electricity. Come after that, we start to scale this up. We call this Industry 2.0, which is actually mass production, so putting things and making goods and services to a much wider audience. The exact same thing happened with electricity. You had Electricity 2.0, which is mass electrification with power plants spreading across back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Then what happened is the advent of silicon, and silicon then helped create automation, start to create the IT sector, enabling new things in terms of the way manufacturing was occurring. Same thing also happened with electricity, where you had photovoltaics start to be used with silicon, and that enabled more digitization the start of digitization of power. Now you'll hear this term Industry 4.0, which is the Internet of Things, and how that's transforming industry and making it smarter. Same thing is happening with electricity, and we call that term Electricity 4.0, which is electricity and digital at scale. Well, what does that mean? Why are we coining this term Electricity 4.0? Number one is that electricity, it's the most efficient vector for decarbonization. Whether or not it's powered by fossil fuel, if you have electric, if that fossil fuel piece that changes to renewables, you have an efficient vector. The other piece is digital. Digital makes the invisible visible. When you stepped into this room today, you didn't think about the energy and the lights and everything else. You thought that it just worked. But in actuality, every device that you see here, that air conditioner right there, the entrance to the building, the fans, they all have their own energy signature. And that, when you break it up into nanoseconds, you can actually see different variances from each of these different pieces of devices. And that in of itself allows you to not only diagnose a problem before it happens, it also allows you to manage it in whole new ways, especially in real time, which transforms the way that we can decarbonize and help our planet. And so then when you think about these two together, this is the point of Electricity 4.0 as being this strong vector for decarbonization. And that's something that is a thread throughout the rest of the presentation. Here's the reality. I just showed you all those 4,000 commitments. How many companies are actually achieving this? I guess 80%? What do you guys think? 2%? 22%. 22%. Well, you're kind of actually in between. 8%. So we're all talk. We're all a bunch of BS right now. Very few people are actually achieving it at the rate that they've expressed. And this is a big, big challenge for us. So again, we went back to the Schneider Research Institute and started to dig into why. And so earlier this year, we interviewed over 500 CXOs, a lot of them sustainability officers, and their N-1s, around what are the challenges that they see in the next 3 to 5 years to achieve these commitments. Here's what they said. Number one is stakeholder alignment, is while we make a commitment, then getting everybody behind it is a whole big issue. Number two, budget and financing, which is also obviously a big issue. However, a lot of the solutions, if they were to go deeper, can actually pay back themselves in a reasonable amount of time. Not having the right technology, which the technology does exist, and I'll show you that in the third part. And then finally, the workforce skills to be able to implement this. And then the last two was actually, okay, here's how do we actually go and reduce the carbon, and then what's the ways that we can actually go after this with the resources that we have, the recycling, circularity, et cetera. And then finally, actually collecting the data to prove it and the transparency, and having that all available in real time as much as possible. So those are the challenges. And then what we did was with the studies, we started to take a look at who's actually meeting their commitments as the leaders, and who's way, way off as the laggards and the followers. And here are the biggest differences that we saw. Number one is that when we talked about defining the ambition and sustainability targets, they didn't have a good strategy for it. So the leaders had it, the starters didn't. A much, much less higher portion of them did not. Having a view of, all of you guys here are innovators, having a team that was actually looking at innovative solutions, 68% of the leaders did, 30% of the starters did. And then lastly, putting the money where the mouth is. Leaders were 2x more invested in this than the laggards were in terms of their R&D, and a lot of them didn't even know how much they were putting in and investing. And you can see the challenges are very different. The laggards, the followers, the starters are working just on stakeholder alignment. They're just trying to get people together. They're trying to figure out who's got the skills, and they're trying to figure out where they can get the money from. Meanwhile, the leaders are worried about other things such as government regulations, carbon reduction strategies. How do you be transparent on the reporting? So very different sets of challenges between the two. And I don't know where you guys are in your journeys, but it's a journey. And in this journey, we've also found out that there are some commonalities in how people are approaching this. And when we think about it, when we looked at it and assessed it, we saw that they're looking at it all in a very similar way as far as the leaders go. So the leaders were all they worked on developing a strategy. They spent a lot of time on the strategize part. Enterprise baselining, measuring it, creating a decarbonization roadmap, creating commitments, and really figuring out a strategy to achieve that. That was the first thing that they did, all together. The second common thing that we saw was that they all had programs to help digitize and really understand and monitor their CO2 emissions, their energy usage, their other forms of resource usage, and they had ways to report and benchmark versus others. And then the last thing was they actually had programs in place to decarbonize. So reducing the same three vectors I showed, electrifying operations, reducing energy usage. These were the three common things that we saw from the 540 CXOs that we interviewed that were the leaders. So strategize, digitize, decarbonize was the common theme, and they were doing this consistently and continuously. So now that brings us to why am I standing here, which is that Schneider Electric, we've been in the business of sustainability for the last 15 years. And we are, I guess, are proud to, first of all, we lead by example, and I'll show a little bit about that. And then we're also a partner for sustainability and efficiency for our customers and partners. And so when we think about, I guess, and we try to prove ourselves and be transparent in how we're delivering this, from the commitment to sustainability, we have a pretty strong roadmap to be net zero or carbon neutral in our operations. So basically hitting our scope 1 and scope 2 in 2025 and 2030. And then getting into scope 3 upstream in 2040, so basically our entire value stream, and then finally net zero across our entire supply chain and our supply chain partners. So that's our big focus to get us to. That's obviously scope 3 upstream. Then on the downstream side, scope 3 downstream and scope 4, we're trying to hit big numbers in terms of CO2 savings. So 800 million tons of CO2, that's actually not a small number. That's 1/4 of what the world right now today is saving, which is 4 gigatons a year. So that's nearly a fourth. PPAs, we're managing nearly 14 gigawatts of renewable PPAs for companies across, and I'll show you some examples. And then also giving people access to energy, especially in underserved markets, underprivileged markets as well, by giving them microgrids, bidirectional grids, and other technologies. And a little bit more of a commercial break on us. These are the different solutions that we have in terms of those 3 different areas that we work with partners on. On Strategize, we deliver our climate and energy domain expertise. We develop PPAs, market advisory services, consulting for electrification, for example. And then we also have new software that helps us also help work with the grid, works with utilities on helping deploy and manage. And then on Digitize, we also have our new software portfolio, our whole software portfolio called EcoStructure that can help digitize a building, your plant, your factory, your hospital, what have you. And then finally, we also have new software that we've acquired called that with RIB, Aviva, ETAP that Bassam will talk about a little bit later today, that helps not only in the operate phase, but also in the design and construct and build phase where there's a lot of waste in CO2. Then on the decarbonize piece, we're the #1 player, undisputed player in energy management. We've been building products like this for years, but now we've advanced them to integrate with digital so that we can help do the same things I was telling you about, manage all the energy in this room better, give you the visibility, and help reduce it, especially as most of this equipment actually is huge consumers of electricity, like transformers, switchgear, et cetera, and reducing that footprint. So that's who we are. In terms of some of the stats that we're proud of, while you may not have all heard about Schneider Electric before you walked into this room, we're everywhere. Like the gentleman said earlier, we're in 1 million buildings today. 50% of the world's data centers, 1 out of every 2 data centers use us. 40% of the world's hospitals. I bet you in your home, 2 out of 5 of you, if you go to electrical panel and it says Square D, that's a Schneider Electric product. And we're also in 3 out of 5 hotel chains. In fact, some of the hotels that you're staying at down the road, we have our technology in. And then, of course, everybody's got to show a logo page. So these are the brands that we work with, just some of the big ones, especially the ones on all of the Strategize, Digitize, Decarbonize piece. So back to the point I was going to mention earlier about how do we solve for this now. Let's give you a practical example, and let's start with the biggest problem that we have, which is buildings. So when we take a look at buildings, 37% of those emissions from energy is coming from buildings. So let's talk about, I think many of you are in the built environment, the built industry. Let's talk about how we solve that and decarbonize. So today, the biggest challenges of where carbon is coming from in the buildings is actually happening not even in that 37% number. It's actually happening before the building is actually operating, which is in the construction side. And there's so much rework. 30% of a building construction is rework and waste. And then also just imagine the embodied carbon that's wasted. And then also imagine if you were to choose lower embodied carbon materials. That could be a bit significant improvement. Fossil fuels, most buildings, I bet you this building today is heated by gas. It's heavily dependent on, of course, on energy supply upstream. They're also the grid itself in Asheville, North Carolina, probably heavily fossil. Low electrification too, talked about the furnace and the boilers. And there's a whole manual control here. I mean, this screen right here is, you raise it up and raise it down. And you've got, and it's all, I would say the fans here are operated by a switch. So, for example, all of that could be automated. And so we spent some time thinking about buildings of the future. And we've also, through our research institute, have also done an extensive modeling on buildings across the world, looking even in different regions in the US, typical archetypes with, say, hospitals, with retail, office service buildings, et cetera, airports. and looked at different types of archetypes. And I'll show you an example here in a few seconds. But this told us, this analysis, which we published, goes into a lot of great detail, but it led us to 4 different insights. One of them I mentioned earlier, which is where many of you are related to, which is the built environment and going from 3D to 6D BIM design, actually embodied carbon calculations, making sure that you're reducing waste by better planning and integration and communications, so that's a big one. On-site solar and storage, while we know what's on this rooftop won't ever power the whole building, there is some self-direction, bidirectional grids in conjunction with on-site solar can solve this. Smart heating and electrification goes without saying. So, instead of a boiler on natural gas, run it on electricity. And then active energy efficiency by having building automation, smart automation to help adjust and optimize the building based on people that aren't sitting in that room next to us versus those of us that are in here generating all this body heat and hot air that I might be doing. Example of how the modeling works is, for example, in this archetype, the study will talk about, like, here's an example. We'll have an office building that's 500,000 square feet, 10 stories. The energy consumption, this is I pulled from the Northeast US, average energy prices, and you can see as you choose and toggle on and toggle off different technologies, you can see the savings you would have in a new build from an energy perspective, from a CO2 perspective, and then, of course, what the return on investment is based on archetypal sort of numbers that we've used. So while it's not exciting in terms of a one-year payback that I think all of you investors are looking for, when you have the incentives come into play, it can really change things, especially when you go from country to country. So it's not just theory, it's real world, and we have 2 examples where Schneider actually lives and breathes the example. One is in Grenoble, France. It's called Intensity. It's a series of buildings. We operate in one of them. It's about 26,000 square meters. Most of our R&D is done out of this building. It's got PV, it's got wind turbines, it's got batteries, it's got geothermal. And it's actually negative net zero. So what does that mean? It actually supplies green energy to the buildings around it, and it does so in a way that gives us a very, very quick payback because of the energy prices, and it's completely autonomous. Sometimes to the point where I'm sitting here and all of a sudden the power goes off or the lights go off and I have to do this to turn it back on, but it's I guess a necessary evil. On the retrofit side, I was actually luckily in Singapore just a few weeks ago. I got to go to our Singapore office. It's about 18,500 square meters and fully autonomous, 100% on renewable energy and carbon neutral. So again, it can be done also with an existing building too as well. So I leave you all with, and then I'm open to some questions here, but hopefully you've all seen that we have the opportunity, all of us here, especially with the might and power that this room has, to help change this new normal and make sure that this is not the new normal so that all is not lost and we can help recover and make this 1.5 degrees possible. So thank you for your time and attention, and of course, would love if you reach out to me afterwards, and I can share some more of the research that we have. It's pretty cool, and thank you for your time and questions. I love the circular room. I have to look at everybody at all corners of my eyes. Yes?
You didn't talk about offsets at all, and we've used them. We've used Schneider for them. I'm sure a lot of those 4,000 companies that are proposing net zero are going to be using offsets. And John Oliver just did this big thing on offsets, and so I'm curious your take on it.
Yeah.
The money we pay is for electricity that's already been offset versus how does that get invested in new renewables that will actually reduce fossil fuels?
Exactly. No, it's a great point. It's the easiest paths are going on renewables and doing offsets. When talking our sustainability business, it's just going to get harder and harder because everybody's trying to do it. So it's just going to make prices higher. It's going to become more expensive, and it's going to be harder to secure. It's just it's something that's part of the basics. And then if you think about all these other advanced areas, it's a way to help reduce. But the offset piece is kind of the building blocks to start with.
What is Schneider doing for power generation? Are they investing in new startups in geothermal or hydrogen? Can you talk a little about that?
We talk a lot about power generation. Our play is mainly in the integration, so bidirectional grids, the microgrids. That's our biggest opportunity. We have grid software that can help deploy, for example, PG&E when they had forest fires and the winds, it was our software that helped deploy and protect and shut down parts of the grid and also help deploy emergency vehicles and identify where fires were occurring. Microgrid also, especially when you're integrating with multiple forms between the main grid and CHP and renewables and batteries, we have that technology. That's our play. That's our play there.
What kind of demand and progress are you seeing in that DERM space, like inside of distribution grids instead of?
Huge in Europe. Much slower, for whatever reason, slower to take up in the U.S. Mainly, it's been on the coast that we've seen it. So PG&E, SDG&E, and then you've got PSEG, Con Ed. Those guys are in more. I'd say more advanced, but they've been more open and more on the cutting edge of using it.
So with your software and your tools, what about private microgrids?
Yeah. So private microgrids are EcoStruxure microgrid operation, and we have microgrid switchgear. That's our scope that we supply to private smaller microgrids, so less than 10 megawatts as well.
So like if we were going to do that, say in a big parking structure and do bidirectionality and stuff like that, your software could manage the.
Absolutely, and Boston right there right there is they provide that. Yep, absolutely. In fact, there's several microgrids I think just around the area that we have too, small private ones. Questions? Yes.
First of all, thank you so much for those reports. I actually have read a couple of those.
Oh, awesome.
You guys do that level of deep research and sort of go a little bit in, sort of digging down into a lot of the details. Question I had is, how do you view, internal versus external innovation? And you seem to have both going on.
Well, we have, I think, representatives from Schneider Ventures that are investing on the external side. One of our commitments is to ramp up on the internal side to go from, I think, 2.5% in R&D up to 7% over the next 5 years to help drive innovation. A lot of it is in the electronic side, so going into more advanced semiconductors. A lot of it is also looking at PoE sort of technologies, DC as well. The DC that originally came hundreds of years ago is sexy again. So those are some of the innovations on the inside, and then the outside. What we're doing with AutoGrid. What we've done in acquisitions in the design build space are the areas that we're investing in. Great, thank you for the question.
So the building you talked about in Singapore, was there a comparison done between if you renovated that building in traditional ways versus with the goal of net zero, what the cost break is on that?
Oh, interesting. I will take that. If we have, I'm not aware of it, but that's a super good question. It would be interesting to see if it would be any earlier or later on. I don't even have a perspective on that. That's a great question. Great question.
I think one of the things regarding, you just brought up is cost, right? It's kind of like one of these things that it is what it is.
Yeah.
So do you target more like developers or clients or like long-term building holders where like they see the actual value over time? Because people who are flipping buildings are trying to do it to make the largest profit.
Yeah.
Which is not, like they're not incentivized currently unless it's some passive way to come out on the end with still the same net profit.
So interestingly, that middle study talks about it's actually the transfer of ownership where they say the economics is the most effective, I guess, for the seller to have it in place for the buyer is what I think it said, but that was or maybe I have the opposite way around for the buyer. So, but it is mentioned. I don't have the detail off the top of my head, but they do go deeper on that on the conversion piece of when you do it based on the economics. And they have that model by region, so you can see exactly like Northeast U.S. Is it this time or this time in the model. Cool. Yes.
Do you think that ROI is enough to motivate people to, if they're not like intrinsically motivated to solve this problem, or do we have to like find a way to internally create hedging and other investment ways to like actually just reduce the cost of the product?
You really do. So unless you have government incentives, or you have an investor that's pushing it, or you have just a commitment where you're going to take on a longer payback. Right now, we're at this kind of precipice where some of it does it, some of it's long cycle returns, but that's where if there's you have to find investors who are willing to take more of the long longer plays, the longer range time horizons. You can see in those examples, it wasn't like 2-year, 1-year paybacks on ROI.
We're just having a lot of conversations with owners where it's like, yeah, we really want to design that way, but we don't want to pay for that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yes, that's right.
As contractors, we VE almost all of it out.
Yeah.
To get to the budget,
Yeah.
whatever the budget is.
They never have a total cost of ownership discussion, it's always day one cost.
Yes.
To put it in.
Yes.
Until they can have a 10, 15-year TCO discussion.
They have to.
I don't think,
Yeah.
they're not evaluating it, right? It's not what they're buying, it's how they're buying it.
Yeah, you've got to get, that's exactly right. They have to somehow get in the mindset, and I don't know if as investors you guys are able to push them into that TCO mindset, but you're absolutely right. And that's how we've tried to look at it in these models.
I would just add that payback is often not the best framing
Yeah.
of this problem. So, we sell into the multifamily industry and we sell energy. And we sell to folks that are developing and then putting in 2 years. And they're not selling a building, they're selling a business. And they sell that business based on its net operating income. After we stabilize the building. And stabilization typically in the past has meant I've got the right renters, I've got, what's my percentage of gross potential rent that I'm getting. Increasingly, it's also a lot of my operating expenses and what of the energy operating expenses. So if you can show that the operating expenses are improved by this, even if it's a 4 or 6 or 10-year payback, that can be valuable even if you're holding for a shorter period.
So just on the top line, just the total operating expenses, not even as it drops to the bottom line, if you can show at least that. Yeah. Okay. That's cool. Very cool. I think there was one more. Was there somebody else?
It is a push because even though you VE out some of it, because of the owners and that kind of thing, Schneider's doing things like making it instead of having it optional, doing more and more that's just built in. That we just provide the data about the carbon footprint and how much renewable or how much recycled content is going into our materials. And then when we control a big chunk of the switching market, and when we manufacture like that, it takes the lead that Schneider has. We just say, look, you can't be specifically to switch when you can't be more efficient.
Forcing it.
So it is a push. We hope that there's that demand there, but we'll also be pushing it.
You guys are creating EPDs and things like that for most of your
Yes. PEPs and EPDs, absolutely. Yes.
How do you sell that it's just the right thing to do?
So that's been one of my, as a marketer, obviously you're trying to always push your products. We're trying to, what you'll start to see on our websites are more and more calculators that can look at combinations of things. So you can look at your situation, choose your grid emissions factor, or choose your location, choose your type of building, and allow you to make choices based on the facts, based on the environmental profiles, et cetera, where it's very, very transparent and fact-based versus me saying, hey, you can save up to 20%, and so it's a slow progress. When we've looked across, besides L'Oreal for your hair and Ford and car companies, it's really hard. This industry, the electrical industry, because it's so dependent on your unique situation to choose the right optimization. But obviously our business development teams can help you optimize in the application engineering, and then ultimately online we'll hopefully have better calculators and simulators.
So is the goal, I think, that if you're a developer, right, and something is going through conceptual design, somebody chooses a piece of land, something gets made. So do you have any applications where you can kind of look at the local ordinances and say these are decent carbon offset credits that we get to like offset the overall cost? Because that's where.
So no simulators yet that do that. However, our sustainability business team, they do look at that. They have there's an ESCO arm, but there is also a consulting arm that will help look at all those ordinances, advise, and everything for your specific situation. Yeah, great question. But I can put you in touch with there. It depends on the region if you're interested. So. All right, I think that's. Oh, one more, and then
one last question. Comment actually, just doubling down on sort of the baking it in piece. So I work for Rocky Mountain Institute, non-profit think tank. We do a lot of work in the same space. And I think this is sort of the gospel that we've been preaching for 40 years around integrated design being a key piece of how to drive down costs. So instead of the sustainability measures being in their own bucket and their own layer on top that sort of often or always get beaten out, if there's ways to bake it into a more integrated design process, we've seen lots of examples that when mass deployed, the cost premium shrinks or disappears.
So great. That's a great head because Bassem will talk about digital twins and integrated designs actually later, and so we actually hit that because that's how you make all this come to life. Is you actually have the digital twin of everything before you actually go and build it, and you actually know the embodied carbon, you know what you're going to construct and the timing, and you know how it's going to operate. Yeah. Thank you all very much. Oh, yeah.